Jeffrey Goldberg, certainly isn't a fan of Donald Trump. The White House is making that abundantly clear. They're talking about how he's a registered Democrat. They're talking about political donations he and his wife have made, and of course his coverage of the Russia scandal back during Trump's first term in office and dating back to his first campaign, really.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by White House reporter Christian Datoc. Christian, the big story this week has been this signal chat with all of President Trump's top national security officials. Where do things stand with that story right now?
Well, where they stand is essentially the same as where they were before this story even broke on Monday. The president has come out. He has defended both Pete Hegseth and Mike Waltz to, the best of his ability, really, while still sort of acknowledging that perhaps we shouldn't be using this technology. Now, I think what Donald Trump is saying, what Mike Waltz is saying, and what Pete Hegseth are all saying sort of runs contrary to what we're hearing from a lot of folks on the outside. They view this as a serious breach of national security, a possible violation of the Espionage Act, and people want heads to roll. But if you ask Donald Trump, if you ask Caroline Leavitt, probably Susie Wiles as well, they're not going to be firing anyone right now as the board currently lies. And I think if you're Donald Trump, you have to look at what Mike Waltz has said and be confident that even though he accepted responsibility, these guys are going to the mat for the president. It's very different from the dynamic he had with his national security team during the first administration, and that sort of shared sense of trust, a two-way loyalty street, if you want to call it that. That's got him happy, and that's why he's defending these guys.
So, we have the situation with a very anti-Trump journalist actually being in this conversation about the Yemen strikes. Then you also have Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, showing information that would appear to a lot of people to probably have been classified. Certainly sensitive, I don't think anybody would dispute that. In this conversation happening in an app that's encrypted, but is not necessarily a government grade. So what is the White House's defense of all of this? What do they have to say?
Well, first and foremost, they are, like you pointed out, saying there was no classified information in these texts. These weren't war plans. Pete Hegseth made that very clear while he's on this Indo-Pacific junket. Right. And I think they're sort of playing semantics a little bit because technically it's not a war plan. It doesn't have total number of troops or total number of fighter jets or missiles that are going to be launched. It did have the sequencing of attacks. It did have specific, aircraft that would be used. Any of that, if obtained by an enemy of the United States, whether a group like the Houthis themselves or maybe even Russia or Iran, they could use that and it would potentially put U.S. lives at stake. Now, I have heard one of the reasons that the White House is saying no classified information is because this was quite literally happening in real time. So it was almost too early that Jeffrey Goldberg got these texts before that sequencing of attacks could be sent up through the Pentagon and go through the actual classification process. It's really uncharted territory that we're in right now. And like you mentioned, Jeffrey Goldberg certainly isn't a fan of Donald Trump. The White House is making that abundantly clear. They're talking about how he's a registered Democrat. They're talking about political donations he and his wife have made, and of course his coverage of the Russia scandal back during Trump's first term in office and dating back to his first campaign, really. So they are trying to deny, and deflect all of the blame back onto Jeffrey Goldberg in the Atlantic.
So Congresswoman Elise Stefanik from New York, a former member of the House Republican leadership team, her nomination has been pulled to be ambassador of the United Nations, apparently out of concern for the razor-thin Republican House majority. What do we make of that?
I think it's a very worrying sign for the Trump administration and Republicans as a whole. If 2 months into this term in office, they're concerned that a district down in South Florida, which Donald Trump won by more than 20 points in November, that's now a toss-up and they're getting out fundraised. That's a bad sign. If you look at Stefanik's race itself, she would probably be in a district that Republicans would call safe.
Right.
But this is just sort of speaks to the general tone across the country, perceptions of what the Trump administration is doing. And I do think you sort of have to feel bad for Stefanik here. There's nothing actually wrong with her as a nominee.
Right.
She was lauded by both Republicans and Democrats when the president was announced as someone who they could trust and was responsible and had some experience in terms of dealing with these foreign nations and dealing with the UN General Assembly and things along those lines. She had to wait to get confirmed. She obviously has had that pulled now. And meanwhile, you've got someone like Mike Waltz, who has put the White House in a very precarious situation regarding Signal.
Former member of the House himself.
Yeah, he's not only got confirmed early, but he is, or I guess, nominated. The NSA doesn't need to be confirmed.
Right.
But he's keeping his job, and meanwhile, Stefanik is being banished back to the House, so to speak.
Yeah, maybe not a good sign for the midterms, but it's a long way out.
Definitely.
Thank you, Christian. You can read Christian and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.